The courtroom was silent, a heavy, suffocating silence that felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. Every eye was fixed on the man in the orange jumpsuit standing before the bench, Lucas Bennett, a former Marine, a man who had survived tours in the most dangerous corners of the world, only to find his biggest battle right out here in a Virginia courthouse. He wasn't fighting for his freedom. He was fighting for something much more important. He was fighting for his life partner. The judge adjusted his glasses, the reflection of the overhead lights hiding his eyes as he looked down at the paperwork. He didn't look at Lucas. He didn't look at the large metal cage in the center of the room. He just cleared his throat a dry final sound. Based on the evidence presented by Mr. Thorne regarding the violent nature of the animal and the threat posed to public safety, this court finds the defendant liable. The animal known as Gunner is hereby declared a dangerous weapon. The order for humane euthanasia is to be carried out immediately. The gavel slammed down. The sound echoed like a gunshot. Lucas felt his knees buckle. He didn't scream. He didn't cry. Soldiers don't cry when the mission fails. They just feel the cold weight of the loss. But this wasn't a mission. This was his boy. Inside the heavy steel cage, Gunner, a Belgian Malinois with a coat like burnished copper and black onyx, stood up. He didn't whine. He didn't pee. He just watched Lucas through the bars, his amber eyes calm, intelligent, and devastatingly loyal. The bailiff moved toward Lucas, reaching for his arm to lead him away. Lucas pulled back, his voice rough like gravel grinding against glass. 1 minute. That is all I ask. Just let me say goodbye. The judge hesitated, glancing at the clock. Then he looked at the plaintiff's table. Julian Thorne, a man in a suit that cost more than Lucas's entire life earnings, checked his gold watch and gave a dismissive shrug. Make it quick, Thorne said, his voice smooth and bored. I have a lunch reservation. The bailiff stepped back, allowing Lucas to approach the cage. The room was thick with tension. Some people in the gallery wiped tears. Others, mostly from Thorne's security team, watched with cold indifference. Lucas knelt by the bars. He pressed his forehead against the cold metal. Hey, buddy, he whispered, his voice trembling for the first time. You did good. You hear me? You did good. Gunner pressed his nose against the bars, sniffing Lucas's skin. But then something shifted. The dog froze. His ears, which had been lowered in submission, suddenly shot up. His tail, which had been still, went rigid. The calm amber eyes that had been locked on Lucas suddenly shifted. They darted past Lucas's shoulder, locking onto something behind him. A low sound began to vibrate in the dog's chest. It wasn't a whine. It wasn't a bark. It was a growl, but not like any growl the people in that room had ever heard. It was a deep mechanical rumble, a frequency so low it rattled the teeth of everyone sitting in the front row. Lucas felt the vibration against his forehead. He pulled back, confused. Gunner. What is it? The dog ignored him. Gunner's eyes were fixed on the plaintiff's table, specifically on the black leather briefcase sitting next to Julian Thorne's leg. The hair along Gunner's spine stood up in a razor-sharp ridge. His lips peeled back, revealing teeth that had taken down insurgents and protected convoys. But this wasn't aggression. Lucas knew that look. He had seen it in the dust of Kandahar. He had seen it on patrol in the mountains. That wasn't the look of a dog about to bite. That was the look of a soldier who had just found the enemy. Gunner let out a sound that chilled the blood of everyone present. A sharp, rhythmic howl. An alert. Officer, get that animal out of here, Thorne shouted, standing up and knocking his chair back. He looked terrified, or maybe he looked angry. It was hard to tell, but Gunner didn't care about the shouting. With a power that defied physics, the Malinois threw his entire 80-pound body against the cage door. The metal latch, old and worn, groaned under the impact. Bam! The cage rattled across the floor. Bam! The second hit was harder. The latch snapped. Screams erupted from the gallery. The judge dove under his bench. People scrambled over chairs, desperate to get away. But Gunner didn't go for the crowd. He didn't go for the judge. He exploded out of that cage like a missile, a blur of muscle and speed flying straight across the courtroom. Lucas scrambled to his feet, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. No, Gunner, stand down. But the command died in the air. Gunner wasn't attacking a person. He lunged straight for the table, his jaws snapping not at Thorne but at the leather handle of the briefcase. He grabbed it, shaking it violently, growling with a ferocity that sent papers flying everywhere. Thorne kicked at the dog, screaming, "Shoot it! Shoot the damn thing!" It's attacking me. Three court marshals drew their weapons, the barrels leveled at the dog. Lucas didn't think. He didn't calculate. He just moved. He threw his body over the dog, shielding Gunner with his own back. Don't shoot! Lucas screamed, his voice cracking with desperation. He's not attacking. He's alerting. Look at him. He's alerting. But chaos is a deafening thing. The marshals were shouting. Thorne was screaming. And in the middle of it all, Gunner released the briefcase and looked up at the ceiling, letting out one final piercing howl before a sharp hiss cut through the air. A tranquilizer dart hit the dog's flank. Gunner flinched. He looked at Lucas, his eyes confused, heavy. He took a step toward the briefcase again, his legs wobbling, fighting the chemicals flooding his veins. He tried to bark, but it came out as a soft chuff. Then his legs gave out. The hero collapsed, his head resting on his paws, his eyes still locked on that black bag as the darkness took him. The room fell into a stunned, terrifying silence. 24 hours earlier, the world had been different. Not good, but simple. Lucas lived in a small, weathered cabin on the edge of the Shenandoah Valley. It was quiet there. Just him, the trees, and Gunner. They were two broken soldiers trying to figure out how to live in a world that didn't need them anymore. Lucas had adopted Gunner after the dog was retired from service. They said Gunner was too intense for civilian life. They said he had trouble switching off. Lucas knew exactly how that felt. They spent their days hiking the perimeter, fixing the old fence, and sitting on the porch, watching the sun go down. It was a peaceful life until the day Julian Thorne's surveyors showed up. Thorne wanted the land. He was building a private security training facility, a massive complex for elite mercenaries. He bought out everyone in the valley, but Lucas wouldn't sell. This cabin was all he had left of his grandfather. It was the only place Gunner could sleep without nightmares. When money didn't work, Thorne turned to other methods. He started filing complaints, noise violations, trespassing accusations, and then the final blow. A fabricated report claiming Gunner had attacked one of Thorne's staff members. There were no bite marks, no medical records, just the word of a powerful man against a hermit ex-soldier. Thorne hired a shark of a lawyer, a man who specialized in destroying lives. They painted Lucas as unstable, a man with PTSD who had weaponized a dangerous animal. They painted Gunner not as a hero, but as a ticking time bomb. And in court, money usually speaks louder than truth. Back in the courtroom, the air was thick with the smell of sweat and fear. The marshals were pulling Lucas off the floor. His hands were yanked behind his back, the cold steel of handcuffs biting into his wrists. He struggled, twisting his neck to see Gunner. The dog lay motionless on the floor, his breathing shallow. Two animal control officers were rolling a stretcher and lifting the heavy, limp body of the dog onto it. "Wait!" Lucas shouted, trashing against the grip of the officers. "Check the bag." "Why won't you listen to me? He's a bomb detection dog." He signaled on the bag. "Check the damn bag." Thorne stood up, straightening his tie. He looked shaken, his face pale, but his eyes were cold, hard flint. He looked at the marshals. "This man is clearly deranged. He commanded that beast to attack me. I want him charged. I want him locked away where he can't hurt anyone else." The head marshal looked at the briefcase lying on the floor, torn and covered in dog saliva. He looked at Lucas, who was screaming about explosives. Protocol demanded they check. Even if it was the ravings of a desperate man, the word bomb changed things. "Clear the room," the marshal ordered. "Bomb squad, get in here." The next 20 minutes were an eternity. Lucas was dragged to a holding cell adjacent to the courtroom, forced to watch through a small reinforced window. He saw the bomb squad enter in their heavy suits. He saw them scan the bag. He saw them carefully, delicately pry it open. His heart pounded. He knew Gunner. Gunner didn't make mistakes. Gunner had found IEDs buried 3 feet underground in a sandstorm. If Gunner said there was a threat, there was a threat. Lucas held his breath, waiting for the confirmation, waiting for the vindication that would save his dog's life. The bomb tech reached into the bag. He pulled out a stack of legal files, then a laptop, then a small velvet jewelry box. He opened the box. Inside was a watch, an expensive gold luxury watch. The tech scanned it. He scanned the lining of the bag. He scanned the laptop. Then he stood up and shook his head. He gave a thumbs up to the judge, who was peering from the chambers. Clear the shout echoed through the room. No explosives found, just personal effects. Lucas felt the blood drain from his face. No, that's impossible. He slammed his shoulder against the door. You missed something. Check it again. You missed it. Thorne laughed. It was a short, dry sound. He picked up his torn briefcase, dusting off the slobber with a look of utter disgust. See, Thorne said loudly, making sure the press gallery heard him. No bomb. Just a violent animal and his paranoid master. This proves everything I said. That dog is a menace. And frankly, so is Mr. Bennett. The narrative was set. The hero dog was now a villain. The soldier was now a lunatic. Lucas slid down the wall of the holding cell, burying his face in his knees. He had failed. He had tried to protect Gunnar, and instead, he had just handed Thorne the hammer to drive the final nail into the coffin. They dragged Gunnar away on the stretcher, the wheels squeaking against the polished floor. The last thing Lucas saw was Gunnar's paw hanging limply off the side, swaying with the movement. They were taking him to be killed, and there was nothing, absolutely nothing Lucas could do about it. Sheriff Brody watched the ambulance load the dog. He was an older man, his uniform tight around a waist, that had seen too many years of desk duty, but his eyes were sharp. He had known Lucas's father, he knew Lucas, and he knew dogs. He had been a canine handler 30 years ago, back when training was rough and dogs were tougher. He stood by his cruiser watching the chaos unfold. He saw Thorne come out of the courthouse surrounded by reporters playing the victim perfectly. He saw the way Thorne clutched that briefcase, holding it tight against his side, his knuckles white. Something didn't sit right with Brody. He lit a cigarette, ignoring the no smoking sign, and narrowed his eyes. He replayed the scene in his mind. The dog hadn't gone for the throat. A Malinois trained to attack goes for the soft tissue, the arm, the neck, the thigh. They bite to hold. They bite to incapacitate. Gunnar hadn't done that. He had gone for the bag, and he hadn't bitten the bag to tear it apart. He had bitten it to take possession of it. That was a retrieval behavior, or an alert. Brody walked over to the animal control van. The driver, a young kid named Evans, was closing the back doors. "Hey, Evans," Brody called out. "Where are you taking him?" Evans looked nervous. "Direct order from the judge-sheriff. He's going to the county facility. Immediate termination. They want it done tonight. Thorne is pushing for it. Says he doesn't want to risk the dog waking up and escaping." Tonight, Brody frowned. The law required a 3-day hold even for dangerous animals, to allow for appeals, to check for rabies. Immediate termination was unheard of unless the animal was actively dying or uncontrollable. Thorne was pulling strings, big strings, and a man with that much money only pulls strings when he's scared. Why was he scared of a dog? Brody looked out through the mesh window of the van. Gunnar was out cold, his chest rising and falling in a slow rhythm. He didn't look like a monster. He looked like a soldier who had taken a bullet for his squad. Brody made a decision. It was a decision that could cost him his badge, his pension, maybe even his freedom. But he looked at Thorne across the parking lot, saw the smug grin on the man's face, and he felt a fire in his gut he hadn't felt in years. Change of plans. Evans. Brody said, his voice low and hard. Evans blinked. "What, I'm taking custody of the animal. This is a county matter, Sheriff." The judge said, "I don't care what the judge said," Brody interrupted, stepping closer, his hand resting casually on his belt. "This dog just attacked a high-profile figure in a federal courtroom. That makes him evidence, and evidence doesn't get incinerated until I say the investigation is closed. You understand?" Evans gulped. He was 22 years old and terrified of Brody. "Yes, sir, but where do I take him?" "The county facility isn't secure enough for evidence like this." Brody looked at the van, then at the distant mountains where the sun was beginning to set. "Take him to the old military veterinary outpost on Ridge Road. It's shut down, but Dr. Emily Cole still uses the lab there for research. Tell her I sent you. Tell her I need a full autopsy workup, but the patient is still alive. And tell her to keep the doors locked." Evans nodded, jumped into the driver's seat, and sped off. Brody watched the van disappear. He knew he had just bought Gunnar a few hours, maybe a night, but he needed answers. He walked back toward the courthouse where Lucas was being loaded into a transport vehicle. Lucas looked up, his eyes hollow dead. Brody leaned into the window. "Keep your mouth shut, Lucas," Brody whispered. "I don't think Gunnar was wrong, and I'm going to find out what was in that bag." Lucas looked at him, a flicker of life returning to his eyes. He recognized the tone. It was the tone of an ally. Meanwhile, in the back of a black SUV, leaving the courthouse, Julian Thorne sat in the leather seat and finally let out a breath he had been holding for an hour. His hands were shaking. He reached for the decanter of whiskey built into the console and poured a glass, downing it in one gulp. He looked at the briefcase sitting on the seat next to him. The leather was scratched, punctured by teeth marks. He ran his finger over the rips. That was too close. Way too close. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number. It rang once. "It's done," Thorne said. "The dog is being destroyed tonight. The owner is in custody. We're clear." He listened for a moment to the voice on the other end, then frowned. "No, the bag is fine." The police scanned it. They found nothing. Because I'm not an idiot. I lined the hidden compartment with lead and mercury mesh. Their scanners can't see through it. But the dog smelled it. Thorne paused, looking out the window at the passing city. "I don't know how. It shouldn't be possible. That dog isn't just a pet. It's something else. Make sure the vet confirms the death. I want pictures of the carcass. I want to know that thing is gone." He hung up and stared at the briefcase. Inside the lining, hidden beneath layers of shielding that fooled the police scanners, sat a micro-containment unit. It wasn't a bomb. It wasn't drugs. It was something far more valuable and far more dangerous. It was a prototype, a guidance chip for a new generation of stealth missiles stolen from a black site facility 3 days ago. A chip that used a rare unstable isotope called lithium-6 as a power source. Lithium-6 had a scent so faint, so unique that no machine invented by man could detect it from outside the lead shielding. But Gunner wasn't a machine. Gunner was a biological miracle trained to hunt the ghosts of chemical warfare, and Thorne had just made the mistake of bringing the ghost right to the hunter's nose. High in the hills, the rain began to fall. The old military veterinary outpost stood like a gray tombstone against the darkening sky. Dr. Emily Cole wiped her hands on a rag as the headlights of the animal control van swept across the windows. She wasn't expecting visitors. She was a woman who preferred animals to people, which was why she lived out here. She walked to the door as Evans pulled up. "Sheriff Brody sent me," Evans stammered, looking over his shoulder as if he expected Thorne's lawyers to jump out of the bushes. "He said to bring the dog here. He said it's evidence." Emily looked into the back of the van. She saw the Malinois. Even sedated, the dog commanded respect. His chest was broad, his paws thick and scarred from service. She saw the tranquilizer dart still sticking out of his flank. "Poor thing," she muttered, climbing in to check his vitals. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency. Heart rate slow, respiration shallow. "He's deep under." "What did he do?" He attacked a briefcase," Evans said. Emily paused. "He attacked a briefcase." "Yeah, and Brody thinks he wasn't attacking. He thinks he was alerting." Emily looked at the dog's face. She lifted his lip, checking his gums. And then she saw it. A small, faint tattoo on the inside of his ear. Not a standard registration number. It was a code. K9G classified. She froze. She knew that code. She had served in the Army Veterinary Corps. That code was reserved for the Guardian program. Dogs that didn't just find bombs. Dogs that were modified, enhanced, trained to detect radiological and biological signatures that didn't technically exist on public records. She looked at Evans. "Get him inside. Now!" But why, Evans asked. Because Emily said, her voice trembling slightly as she realized what lay on her table. If this dog alerted he didn't smell a ham sandwich, he smelled death. And if the people who own that briefcase know what this dog is, they aren't going to wait for a court order to kill him. They're coming. Right now. As they carried Gunner into the clinic, the wind picked up, howling through the trees. Down in the valley, a black helicopter lifted off from a private pad at Thorne's estate, banking sharply toward the mountains. The hunt wasn't over. It had just begun. And in the silence of the exam room, Gunner's paw twitched. The sedatives were wearing off. The soldier was waking up. And he had a mission to finish. The rain battered the corrugated metal roof of the old veterinary clinic, sounding like 1,000 tiny hammers trying to break in. Inside, the air was cold and smelled of rubbing alcohol and old dust. Dr. Emily Cole stood over the stainless steel table, her face illuminated by the harsh fluorescent light above. She was a woman of science, cold, precise, and efficient. She had served 5 years as a field surgeon in the Army Veterinary Corps, patching up dogs that had been blown apart by IEDs in the desert. She had seen everything, or at least she thought she had, but tonight felt different. Lying on the table before her was Gunner. The massive Belgian Malinois was still under the effects of the tranquilizer, his breathing slow and heavy. His coat was matted with mud and rain, but beneath the grime, Emily could see the powerful muscles of a warrior. He didn't look like a vicious animal. He didn't look like the monster the court papers described. He looked like a soldier sleeping between battles. Emily sighed, pushing a stray lock of hair behind her ear. She hated this part of the job. The sheriff had called it a favor, a way to buy time, but the paperwork on the counter was a death warrant. Immediate termination, no appeals. She picked up the electric razor. Her hand was steady. It was always steady. She needed to shave a small patch on his front leg to find the vein for the IV, but looking at the thick scarring on his legs, she decided against it. Too much trauma tissue. She moved to the neck. The jugular would be faster, cleaner. It was a mercy. She turned on the razor, the buzzing sound cutting through the silence of the room. Gently, she pressed it against the thick fur on the side of Gunner's neck. Tufts of copper and black hair fell away, revealing the pale skin beneath, and then she stopped. Her finger hovered over the power switch, silencing the razor. There, running parallel to the jugular vein, was a scar. But it wasn't a scar from a fight. It wasn't jagged or raised like a bite mark. It was a thin, perfectly straight white line, barely 2 inches long. It was surgical, precision work. Emily frowned, leaning closer. She ran her gloved thumb over the line. Beneath the skin, she didn't feel the soft give of muscle. She felt something hard, something rectangular. This wasn't a microchip. Microchips were the size of a grain of rice and floated loosely between the shoulder blades. This was anchored. It was fused to the bone structure of the jaw. A cold knot formed in Emily's stomach. She knew what surgery looked like. She knew what military modifications looked like. But this was advanced. This was beyond anything she had seen in the field. Curiosity warred with protocol. She should just administer the injection and go home, but she couldn't. She walked to the back cabinet, unlocking a heavy drawer she hadn't opened in years. Inside sat a device that looked like a bulky barcode scanner, but heavy military grade. A deep tissue scanner. She hadn't used it since her discharge, but she kept the batteries charged. Old habits. She walked back to the table, the device humming to life in her hand. The green light of the scanner washed over Gunner's sleeping face. She held her breath as she passed the sensor over the scar on his neck. The machine beeped once, then twice. Then it let out a long, high-pitched tone that made Emily jump. The screen didn't show a registration number. It didn't show an owner's name or a vaccination history. The screen turned a bright, alarming red. Text scrolled across the small digital display glowing in the dim room. Biosensor active. Class 4 restricted. Property of Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. Emily gasped, the scanner slipping from her fingers and clattering onto the metal table. The noise echoed loudly, but she didn't hear it. Her eyes were glued to the screen. DARPA. This wasn't just a police dog. This wasn't even a standard military working dog. Gunner was a prototype. She grabbed the scanner again, her hands trembling now. She switched the mode to X-ray overlay. The image that appeared on the screen made the blood drain from her face. It wasn't just a chip. Fused along the dog's jawbone was a complex network of filaments, tiny sensors thinner than a human hair woven directly into his olfactory nerves. It was a sensory enhancement system, a biosensor designed to detect things no normal dog and certainly no machine could ever smell. Specific isotopes, viral strains, chemical agents that were colorless, odorless, and deadly. Emily stepped back, her heart hammering against her ribs. Lucas Bennett wasn't crazy. He wasn't a paranoid ex-soldier making up stories to save his pet. He was telling the truth. Gunner hadn't attacked that briefcase because he was aggressive. He had attacked it because he was programmed to. He had detected something inside that bag, something so dangerous, so volatile, that the government had spent millions of dollars turning this dog into a living, breathing Geiger counter to find it, and she had almost killed him. The realization hit her like a physical blow. She looked at the syringe full of pink liquid sitting on the tray. It looked like poison now. She had almost destroyed the only thing standing between the public and whatever was in Julian Thorne's briefcase. Suddenly, a sound broke her paralysis. A low rhythmic tapping. Click, click, Click. Emily froze. She looked down at the table. Gunnar was awake. The sedative should have kept him out for another hour, but his metabolism was burning through it at an impossible rate. His eyes were open. They weren't glassy or confused. They were clear, sharp, and focused. Amber pools of intelligence that seemed to look right through her. He didn't bark. He didn't growl. He didn't try to bite the hand that was just moments away from ending his life. He simply lay there, his head resting on the metal table, watching her. Then slowly, deliberately, he lifted his head. He looked at Emily, holding her gaze for a long second, a look of profound communication that sent shivers down her spine. Then he turned his head sharply toward the window. He looked back at her, then back at the window. He let out a soft, almost silent chuff of air through his nose. It wasn't a noise of pain. It was a signal. Emily frowned, confusion clouding her fear. "What are you looking at?" she whispered, her voice trembling in the empty clinic. She moved toward the window, reaching for the blinds. Outside, the storm was raging, rain lashing against the glass, turning the world into a blur of shadows and water. She peered through the slats, squinting into the darkness. At first, she saw nothing but the swaying trees and the empty road, but then a flash of lightning illuminated the driveway. 3 black SUVs were rolling silently up the hill, their headlights off. They moved like predators, slow and stalking. Men were spilling out of the vehicles before they even came to a complete stop. They were dressed in tactical gear, heavy raincoats, and they were carrying weapons. Not tranquilizer guns, real guns. Suppressed rifles. Emily stumbled back from the window, her hand flying to her mouth. They weren't coming to check on the dog. They were coming to erase the evidence. Thorne hadn't trusted the court order. He wanted to make sure the job was done, and he didn't care who got in the way. She turned back to Gunnar. The dog was already standing. He swayed slightly, his legs still weak from the drugs, but he locked his knees, forcing himself to stay upright. He looked at the door, the fur on his neck rising, his lips peeling back in a silent snarl. He wasn't looking at the door with fear. He was calculating the distance. He was preparing for a breach. Emily realized with a jolt of terror that she was the liability here. She was the civilian. Gunnar was the soldier. And he knew that the enemy was at the gate. She scrambled to the back of the room, grabbing her keys and a first aid kit. She didn't know what to do, but she knew she couldn't stay here. "We have to go," she whispered, rushing to the table to unclip the restraint on his collar. Gunnar didn't wait. As soon as the clip clicked open, he slid off the table. He didn't run to the back door. He moved to the side of the room, pressing his body against the wall, out of the line of sight from the main entrance. He looked at Emily and gave a short, sharp nod toward the rear exit. It was a command. Move. The glass of the front door shattered. A canister rolled across the floor, hissing as it spun. Smoke. Tear gas. Emily coughed, her eyes stinging instantly. She grabbed Gunnar's collar, but he pulled away. He wasn't leaving yet. He positioned himself in the shadows, his body low, his muscles coiled like springs. He was waiting for the first man to walk through that smoke. Emily hesitated at the back door, tears streaming down her face, her heart pounding so hard it hurt. She looked at the dog, this biological miracle, this forgotten hero. He looked back at her one last time, his amber eyes burning with a fierce protective fire. "Go," his eyes seemed to say. "I'll hold them off." And as the first boot crunched over the broken glass in the lobby, Gunnar launched himself into the smoke, a silent missile flying into the heart of the danger, fighting not for his own life, but for hers. The clinic erupted into chaos, but Emily was already running into the rain, knowing that the only way to save him was to find the one man who could understand what Gunnar was saying. She had to find Lucas. The canister skittered across the linoleum floor, hissing like a coiled snake as it spewed thick, acrid white smoke into the small clinic. Dr. Emily Cole coughed, her eyes stinging instantly, tears blurring her vision as the harsh chemical bite of tear gas filled her lungs. She grabbed the edge of the counter, disoriented, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Through the haze, the sound of heavy boots crunching over the shattered glass of the front door echoed with terrifying clarity. They were inside. This wasn't a robbery. Robbers shouted. Robbers made demands. These men moved in silence, communicating with hand signals and the subtle click of safety catches being disengaged. They were a cleanup crew sent by a man with unlimited resources to ensure that the only evidence linking him to a federal crime, a dog named Gunnar, ceased to exist. Emily instinctively looked for the animal. She expected him to be cowering in the corner or perhaps barking wildly in panic, confused by the smoke and the noise. But the metal examination table was empty. The corner was empty. Gunnar was gone. For a heartbeat, she thought he had bolted, fled through the open rear exit she had unlocked moments ago, but then she saw movement in the shadows, low to the ground beneath the heavy oak desk near the reception area. It wasn't the erratic movement of a frightened animal. It was still, calculated. Gunnar was pressed flat against the floor, his dark coat blending perfectly with the gloom. His eyes were not wide with fear, but narrowed into slits of pure predatory focus. He wasn't hiding. He was waiting. He was setting an ambush. A laser sight cut through the smoke, a red beam dancing across the cabinet, searching. The first mercenary stepped fully into the room. He was a giant of a man clad in black tactical gear, his face obscured by a gas mask. He raised his suppressed rifle, scanning the room with mechanical precision. Target unseen. A muffled voice crackled from his radio. "Clear the room. Check the back." The man took another step forward, his boot passing inches from the desk. That was the mistake. Gunnar didn't growl. He didn't bark to warn them. He launched. It was an explosion of motion so fast that Emily's brain barely registered it. 1 second the dog was a shadow, the next he was a missile. But he didn't go for the man's throat. A normal dog, even a trained police dog, often targets the nearest limb or goes for the face out of instinct. Gunnar went low. His jaws clamped around the man's right ankle, not just biting, but twisting. He used his 80 pounds of momentum to torque the man's leg sideways. There was a sickening pop of cartilage followed by a grunt of shock and pain. The mercenary's leg buckled. As the man fell backward, his rifle discharging a harmless round into the ceiling, Gunnar didn't hold on. He released instantly. This was what shocked Emily the most. The dog released. He didn't savage the man. He neutralized the threat and reset. As the first man hit the floor, writhing and reaching for his sidearm, Gunnar was already moving. He vaulted over the fallen body, using the man's chest as a springboard to launch himself at the second intruder emerging from the smoke. The second man saw the blur of motion and tried to raise his weapon, but Gunnar was already inside his guard. The dog slammed into him, driving his shoulder into the man's solar plexus. The breath left the mercenary in a wheezing gasp. As the man doubled over, Gunnar snapped his jaws, clamping onto the man's right wrist. The gun hand. He bit down hard right on the pressure point. The rifle clattered to the floor. It was surgical. It was terrifying. Emily watched frozen near the back door, her hand covering her mouth. She had treated military working dogs before, but she had never seen one in combat. This wasn't an animal fighting for survival. This was a soldier clearing a room. Gunnar moved with an efficiency that was almost human. He anticipated their movements. He used the environment. He used the smoke. The third man standing near the doorway panicked. He saw his 2 team members down in less than 5 seconds. He raised his weapon, firing blindly into the room. Bullets sparked against the metal cabinets, shattering jars of specimen samples. Glass and alcohol sprayed everywhere. Gunnar didn't charge the gunfire. He didn't run into the line of fire like a hero in a movie. He dropped flat belly to the floor, sliding behind the cover of the heavy reception desk as the bullets chewed up the wood above his head. He looked at Emily. Their eyes met across the chaotic, smoke-filled room. His amber gaze was clear, intense, and demanding. He barked once, a short, sharp sound. It wasn't a request. It was an order. Go. Emily snapped out of her trance. She realized with a jolt that Gunnar wasn't trying to win a war here. He was buying time. He was creating a distraction so she could escape. If she stayed, she was dead, and his fight would be for nothing. Move, she told herself, her legs feeling like lead. She turned and shoved the heavy steel door open, the cold night air rushing in to mix with the acrid smoke. The rain was coming down in sheets now, a torrential downpour that turned the gravel lot into a river. She sprinted toward her truck, an old rusted Ford that had seen better days. Behind her, the sounds of the struggle changed. The gunfire stopped. There was a shout, a curse, and the sound of something heavy crashing into the shelves. She fumbled with her keys, her hands shaking so violently she dropped them in the mud. No, no, no! She fell to her knees, groping blindly in the dark water, soaking through her jeans instantly. She found the keys. She scrambled up, jamming the metal into the lock. She threw the door open and climbed into the driver's seat, slamming the lock down. She looked back at the clinic. The back door was still open. Gunner wasn't there. "Start, please, start," she begged, twisting the ignition. The engine groaned, sputtered, and died. The old battery hated the cold. She tried again. The engine whined, protesting. "Come on." Suddenly, a dark shape exploded from the back door of the clinic. Gunner. He was limping slightly, favoring his left hind leg, but he was moving fast. He didn't look back. He ran straight for the truck. The third mercenary appeared in the doorway, raising his rifle. Gunner leaped. He didn't have the strength to clear the tailgate. He hit the side of the truck bed, scrabbling with his claws against the wet metal. Emily screamed, throwing the passenger door open. "Get in!" Gunner abandoned the truck bed and scrambled around to the passenger side. He threw himself into the cab just as a bullet shattered the side mirror, spraying glass over the dashboard. Emily twisted the key one last time, pumping the gas pedal desperately. The engine roared to life with a choked cough and a plume of black smoke. She didn't wait to check her mirrors. She slammed the truck into gear and stomped on the gas. The tires spun in the mud, searching for traction before finally catching. The truck lurched forward, fishtailing violently as they sped away from the clinic gravel, spraying like buckshot against the undercarriage. She drove blindly, her headlights cutting through the rain, taking the corners of the mountain road fast enough to make the frame groan. She didn't let up until the clinic was miles behind them, lost in the storm and the darkness. Only then did she dare to look at the passenger seat. Gunner was sitting upright, though his body swayed with the motion of the truck. He was panting heavily, his tongue lolling out blood, some not smeared across his muzzle. He was fighting the lingering effects of the sedative, his eyes drooping, but he refused to lay down. He kept his gaze fixed on the rear window, watching for headlights, watching for pursuit. Emily reached out her hand, trembling, and touched his shoulder. He flinched, then leaned into her touch, letting out a long, weary exhale. She felt the hard ridge of the biosensor implant beneath his skin, the scar that marked him as government property. "You're not a dog, are you?" she whispered, tears streaming down her face, mixing with the soot and rain. "You're a weapon." Gunner looked at her. The fierce tactical intelligence in his eyes softened for a brief moment. He licked the blood from his nose and rested his chin on her console, closing his eyes for just a second. He wasn't a weapon. Not to Lucas. To Lucas, he was a partner. And Emily realized with sudden clarity that the only way to keep this dog alive, the only way to survive what was coming, was to reunite him with the soldier who made him human. They needed Lucas, and to get to him, they would have to disappear. Emily gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white, and turned the truck onto an old logging road that didn't appear on any GPS. The chase was on, and for the first time in her life, Dr. Emily Cole was running from the law with a four-legged fugitive who was worth more than her life sitting in the passenger seat. The fluorescent lights of the county lockup hummed with a low, irritating buzz that sounded like a trapped fly dying on a windowsill. Lucas Bennett sat on the thin, springless cot, his head in his hands, staring at the concrete floor. The cell was cold, smelling of ammonia and old sweat, but Lucas didn't feel the chill. He felt something else, a phantom pain. It started in his chest, a sharp, sudden constriction that had nothing to do with his heart and everything to do with his soul. It was the same feeling he used to get in Kandahar seconds before an IED went off. The hair on his arms stood up, his breath hitched. Gunner. He knew it as surely as he knew his own name. The connection between a handler and a military working dog isn't just about commands and treats. It is a neural pathway forged in fire and blood. They had shared a mind for 5 years. When Gunner was hungry, Lucas's stomach growled. When Gunner was afraid, Lucas's hands shook. And right now, in the silence of this jail cell, Lucas could feel Gunner's panic. He could feel the adrenaline spiking in the dog's blood. He could feel the pain of a struggle. They were hurting him. Right now. Lucas stood up, his movements sudden and violent. He paced the small cell 3 steps forward, turned 3 steps back. His mind raced. Brody had said he was taking Gunner to a safe place. To a vet. But something had gone wrong. The feeling in Lucas's gut twisted into a knot of pure dread. Gunner wasn't safe. He was fighting for his life. "Hey, sit down, Bennett." The voice came from the other side of the bars. It was the night deputy, a kid named Hayes, who looked like he was barely old enough to shave. He was leaning back in his chair, feet up on the desk, reading a comic book. He had the arrogant, bored look of someone who had never seen real violence. Lucas stopped pacing. He looked at the kid. He assessed him in less than a second. Weight maybe 160. Right-handed. Distracted. Complacent. The keycard was on his belt. The backup weapon was on his ankle, poorly concealed. Officer Lucas said, his voice straining tight with feigned agony. He leaned against the bars, clutching his chest. I can't breathe. Hayes glanced up unimpressed. Yeah, right. Tell it to the judge in the morning. No, seriously. Lucas gasped, sliding down the bars until he hit the floor. He let his body convulse once, then twice. He made his breathing shallow, ragged. My heart, the meds, I need... He let his head loll to the side, his eyes rolling back. It was a performance, but it was grounded in reality. The panic he felt for Gunnar was real, and he channeled every ounce of it into his physical state. Hayes hesitated. He stood up, dropping the comic book. Hey, Bennett. Quit messing around. Lucas didn't answer. He lay perfectly still on the cold concrete, his hand twitching weakly. The kid panicked. If a prisoner died on his watch, his career was over before it started. Shit, Hayes muttered. He grabbed his radio, but then hesitated. He didn't want to call it in if it was a false alarm. He decided to check first. Amateur mistake. Hayes walked to the cell door. He swiped his keycard. The heavy lock clicked with a mechanical thud. The gate slid open 3 inches. Hayes stepped close, keeping 1 foot outside, just like they taught in the academy. Bennett. He reached out to shake Lucas's shoulder. That was the moment the trap sprung. Lucas moved with the speed of a striking cobra. His hand shot up, grabbing the deputy's wrist. He didn't pull. He twisted. He used the kid's own momentum against him, yanking him down and forward. Hayes' face met the concrete with a sickening crunch. Before the deputy could scream, Lucas was on top of him. He applied a sleeper hold, his forearm cutting off the blood flow to the carotid artery. It was gentle, precise, and instantaneous. Sorry, kid, Lucas whispered as Hayes' eyes fluttered shut. You'll wake up with a headache, but you'll wake up. Lucas stood. He grabbed the keycard and the deputy's radio. He didn't take the gun. He wasn't a criminal. He was a soldier on a mission. He stepped out of the cell, locking it behind him with Hayes safely inside on the cot. He moved through the hallways of the station like a ghost. He avoided the cameras, sticking to the blind spots he had memorized while being processed earlier. He wasn't trying to escape the building. He wasn't running for the border. He was heading deeper into the station. He needed to find the man who had the power to stop this. Sheriff Brody's office was on the 2nd floor. The door was a frosted glass pane with his name stenciled in black. A light was still burning inside. Lucas didn't knock. He swiped the keycard and pushed the door open. Sheriff Brody was sitting at his desk, staring at a bottle of whiskey and a stack of files. When the door opened, his reaction was instant. He spun his chair, his hand flying to the service revolver on his desk. He leveled it at the door. Freeze. Lucas stood in the doorway, his hands raised, palms open. He was unarmed. He was breathing hard, sweat beading on his forehead, his orange jumpsuit stark against the dark wood of the office. Don't shoot, Sheriff Lucas said, his voice calm, deadly serious. I'm not here to hurt you. Brody's eyes widened. Bennett, how the hell did you get out? It doesn't matter, Lucas said, stepping into the room. He kicked the door shut behind him. You have to listen to me. Gunnar is in trouble. I can feel it. Brody kept the gun leveled, his finger resting on the trigger guard. You broke out of a federal holding cell because of a feeling. You just added 5 years to your sentence, son. Get on the ground. Now. I don't care about the sentence. Lucas shouted, the raw emotion finally cracking his stoic veneer. He took a step forward, ignoring the gun. You sent him to that vet clinic, didn't you? You thought you were buying him time, but you didn't. You sent him into a kill box. Brody hesitated. The intensity in Lucas's eyes wasn't madness. It was conviction. What are you talking about, Thorne? Lucas said, the name tasting like bile. You think he wants that dog dead because he's aggressive? You think a billionaire hires a top-tier legal team and bribes a judge just to put down a pet that barked at him? Brody lowered the gun slightly. Make your point, Bennett. The briefcase, Lucas said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. In the courtroom, Gunnar didn't attack Thorne. He didn't attack the lawyers. He went for the bag. He locked onto it. He ignored my commands. He ignored the bailiffs. He was willing to die to get to that bag. We scanned the bag, Lucas Brody said, shaking his head. The bomb squad cleared it. There were no explosives. I know there were no explosives. Lucas slammed his hand on the desk, making the whiskey bottle jump. Gunner isn't just a bomb dog. He was part of the Guardian program. Do you know what that is? Brody stayed silent, watching him. It's a black-budget DARPA initiative. Lucas continued, the words tumbling out fast. They didn't just train them to smell nitrates or gunpowder. They modified them. They enhanced their olfactory nerves to detect specific chemical signatures, signatures that machines miss, signatures that are shielded by lead. Brody's face paled slightly. Modified, Lucas nodded. Gunner wasn't alerting to a bomb. He was alerting to a component, something radioactive, something biological, something extremely illegal and extremely valuable. That's why Thorne panicked. He didn't care about being bitten. He cared about being discovered. Lucas leaned over the desk, staring straight into the sheriff's eyes. Thorne isn't a businessman. He's a smuggler. And my dog is the only thing on this planet that can prove it. That's why he wants him dead tonight. He isn't worried about public safety. He's worried about a witness. Gunner is living evidence. Sheriff, and right now Thorne's men are probably tearing that clinic apart to silence him. The room was silent for a long, agonizing second. Brody looked at Lucas. He saw the desperation. He saw the truth. He thought about the phone call he had received from the judge, the pressure to bypass the 3-day waiting period. It all stank of a cover-up. Brody holstered his gun. He grabbed his keys and his radio. "If you're lying to me, Bennett, I'll shoot you myself," Brody growled, grabbing his hat. "I'm not lying," Lucas said, "but we have to hurry. If Gunner dies, the truth dies with him, and I won't let that happen." Brody threw a set of keys to Lucas. "Take the backup cruiser in the lot. Follow me. And for God's sake, stay off the radio." Lucas caught the keys. He didn't say thank you. There was no time. He turned and ran, his heart pounding in sync with the phantom heartbeat of the dog he would burn the world down to save. The jailbreak was over. The war had just begun. The storm over Shenandoah National Park was not just rain. It was a deluge, a curtain of water so thick it felt like the sky was trying to wash the mountain clean of its secrets. The towering pines swayed violently in the wind, groaning like dying giants, their branches thrashing against the darkness. Down a muddy, forgotten fire road that hadn't seen a ranger vehicle in a decade, a pair of headlights cut through the gloom. Dr. Emily Cole gripped the steering wheel of her battered pickup truck until her knuckles turned white. The wipers were useless, slapping frantically against the windshield without clearing the blur. Every shadow looked like a mercenary. Every flash of lightning looked like the beam of a searchlight. Beside her on the torn upholstery of the passenger seat, Gunner sat rigid. He was shivering not from the cold but from the adrenaline crash. The blood on his muzzle had dried into a dark crust, and he held his left front paw awkwardly off the seat, favoring the shoulder he had used as a battering ram back at the clinic. He let out a low, vibrating whine, his nose pressed against the cold glass. He smelled something. Not the enemy. Not the metallic tang of blood or the chemical bite of tear gas. He smelled home. Emily saw the silhouette of a police cruiser parked near the old ranger station up ahead, its lights killed, looking like a sleeping beast in the rain. She slammed on the brakes, the truck sliding sideways in the mud before coming to a halt. Before the engine even stopped shuddering, the passenger door flew open. Gunner didn't wait. He tried to leap out, but his injured leg buckled, sending him tumbling onto the wet gravel. He scrambled up instantly, ignoring the pain, ignoring the mud coating his burnished coat. He let out a sound that tore at Emily's heart, a high-pitched, desperate yelp that sounded nothing like a war dog and everything like a lost child finding his father in a crowd. From the shadows of the cruiser, a figure stepped out. Lucas Bennett. He was still wearing the orange jumpsuit from the jail, soaked through within seconds, his hair plastered to his skull. He fell to his knees in the mud, opening his arms wide. Gunner hit him with the force of a freight train. The impact knocked Lucas backward into the slush, but he didn't care. He wrapped his arms around the dog's neck, burying his face in the wet fur. Gunner was frantic, licking the rain from Lucas's face, whining, crying, his tail thumping a rapid, chaotic rhythm against Lucas's ribs. "I've got you, buddy." "I've got you, Lucas," sobbed his voice, lost in the wind. The tough Marine, the stoic soldier who had stared down a judge hours earlier without blinking, was gone. In his place was a man reunited with the other half of his soul. He ran his hands over the dog's body, checking for wounds, his fingers trembling as he felt the tremors in Gunner's frame. You're okay. You're okay. Emily stepped out of the truck, shielding her eyes from the rain. She watched them for a moment, the raw power of their bond making her feel like an intruder. Sheriff Brody stepped out of the cruiser holding an umbrella that was useless in the sideways rain. He nodded at Emily, his face grim. We can't stay here long, Brody shouted over the wind. If Thorne has satellite access, he'll track the heat signatures. Get inside the cabin. They moved into the abandoned ranger station. It was musty, smelling of dry rot and old wood, but it was dry. Brody lit a kerosene lantern, the yellow light flickering across the peeling walls. Lucas sat on the floor, refusing to take a chair, with Gunner's head resting heavily in his lap. The dog's eyes were closed, his breathing finally slowing as Lucas stroked his ears. Emily cleared her throat. She placed a ruggedized tablet on the dusty table. Her hands were still shaking, but her voice was clinical, precise. Lucas, you need to see this, she said. Lucas looked up, his eyes red-rimmed but sharp. What is it? Emily tapped the screen. It lit up, displaying the scan she had taken back at the clinic. The skeletal structure of a canine skull glowed in blue, but along the jawline, highlighted in angry red, was a complex web of foreign material. I was about to euthanize him, Emily said, the shame coloring her tone. I was shaving his neck for the injection when I found a scar. It wasn't from a fight. It was surgical. I ran a deep tissue scan. She zoomed in on the image. That isn't a microchip, Lucas. That is a biosensor array. It's fused directly into his olfactory nerves and linked to his printed stem. It's not just monitoring him, it's enhancing him. Lucas frowned, looking down at Gunner. I knew he was special. He found IEDs that other dogs walked right past, but I thought he was just gifted. He is gifted, Emily said, but he was also built. This tech, it's Project Guardian. Brody stepped closer, squinting at the screen. I've heard rumors of that. Cold War stuff. Trying to make super soldiers. No, Emily corrected. Not soldiers. Sentinels. Project Guardian was a black-budget DARPA initiative designed to detect things machines couldn't. Specifically, rare earth elements. The kind used in dirty bombs, stealth missile guidance systems, and advanced nuclear weaponry. She looked Lucas dead in the eye. There was only one successful prototype. One dog that didn't reject the implant. One dog whose brain could process the sensory input without seizing up. The program was officially scrapped 5 years ago. All assets were supposed to be destroyed. Lucas stroked the scar on Gunner's neck. They told me he was being retired because of aggression issues. They lied. They hid him in the general adoption pool to erase the paper trail. Exactly, Emily said. But Julian Thorne found him. Or rather, he found the technology Gunner reacts to. She pulled up a second image on the tablet, a chemical breakdown. When Gunner attacked that briefcase in court, he wasn't smelling explosives. He wasn't smelling drugs. He was smelling this. She pointed to a chemical symbol, Promethium-147 and refined lithium-6. These are stabilizing agents for next-generation tactical nukes. They are incredibly rare, incredibly unstable, and virtually odorless to humans and standard K9s. But to Gunner, to a dog with that sensor in his jaw, it smells like a 5-alarm fire. Lucas finished, his voice cold. That briefcase wasn't empty, Emily said. It contained a component, a core, something small enough to hide in a lining but dangerous enough to level a city block if mishandled. Thorne isn't just a corrupt contractor. He's selling doomsday devices to the highest bidder. The silence in the cabin was heavier than the storm outside. Lucas looked at his dog. Gunner opened one eye, looking back with a sleepy, trusting gaze. He wasn't a monster. He wasn't a weapon. He was a witness to a crime so massive it made the head spin. Thorne knows, Lucas whispered. He knows Gunner smelled it. That's why he wanted him dead tonight. Not tomorrow. Tonight. Because as long as Gunner breathes, Thorne is walking around with a target on his back. Brody checked his service revolver, spinning the cylinder. Well, that complicates things. We aren't just hiding a dog anymore. We're hiding a national security asset. And Thorne has a private army. Lucas stood up. Gunner rose with him wincing as he put weight on his bad leg, but standing tall nonetheless. He's not an asset, Lucas said, his voice low and dangerous. He's my partner. and Thorne made a mistake. What mistake? Emily asked. He let us reunite, Lucas said, looking out the window at the rain-lashed forest. He thinks he's hunting a man and a dog. He doesn't realize he's hunting a pack, and we're done running. A flash of lightning illuminated Lucas's face. It was hard resolved and terrifyingly calm. He looked at the map on the wall. If Thorne has the core, he needs to move it. He won't keep it at the courthouse. He'll take it to his estate, to his vault. We can't storm his estate, Brody said. He has 50 armed guards. We don't need to storm it, Lucas said, kneeling down to retie his boots. We just need to get Gunnar close enough to prove what's in there. Thorne thinks the law is on his side. He thinks the briefcase was cleared. He's arrogant. Lucas turned to Emily. Can that scanner record data? Can it prove what Gunnar is smelling? Emily nodded. It has a localized data logger. If Gunnar gets within 10 feet of the source, the sensor in his jaw will transmit a confirmation code to the scanner. It's admissible in a military tribunal. Then we have a plan, Lucas said. He put his hand on Gunnar's head. Ready for one last mission, buddy? Gunnar didn't bark. He just leaned into Lucas's hand and let out a low, deep rumble. It was the sound of a soldier who was ready to go to war. The reunion was over. The counterattack was about to begin. The rain drummed a relentless rhythm against the roof of the abandoned ranger station, a sound that usually brought Bennett peace, but tonight it felt like a countdown. Inside the dim cabin, lit only by the flickering yellow glow of a kerosene lantern, the air was thick with the smell of wet wool, old wood, and the lingering tension of a mystery that was rapidly turning into a death sentence. Lucas sat on the floor, his back against the rough log wall, watching Gunnar. The dog was finally resting, his injured legs stretched out awkwardly, his breathing deep and rhythmic. But even in sleep, Gunnar's ears twitched at the sound of the thunder, his muscles jumping beneath his coat. He was still on patrol. Dr. Emily Cole sat at the rickety table, her face illuminated by the blue light of her tablet. She was running simulations trying to decode the data from the biosensor scan. Sheriff Brody paced by the window, peering through the cracks in the boarded-up glass, his hand never straying far from his service weapon. They were safe for the moment, but safety was an illusion when you were hunting a man like Julian Thorne. Lucas closed his eyes, forcing his mind back to the courtroom. He needed to understand. He needed to know why Gunnar, a dog with discipline etched into his very DNA, had broken formation. He replayed the moment in slow motion, the way Gunnar's nose had lifted, the specific pitch of his whine, and then the smell. Lucas opened his eyes, staring into the middle distance. There had been a smell. In the chaos of the courtroom, amidst the sweat of the bailiffs and the sterile scent of floor polish, there had been something else. It was faint, almost imperceptible, ghosting through the air the moment Thorne had opened that briefcase to show the judge his watch. It smelled like vanilla. Lucas frowned. Why would a briefcase smell like vanilla? It was sweet, cloying, but underneath it there was a sharp metallic tang, like the air after a lightning strike. Ozone. Vanilla and ozone. The combination triggered a memory so visceral it made Lucas's stomach clench. He wasn't in a cabin in Virginia anymore. He was back in a dusty tent in the Helmand province, standing guard over a specialized containment unit while a team of guys in hazmat suits loaded a crate. One of the techs had dropped a vial of solvent. It had shattered. The tent had filled with that exact smell, vanilla and ozone. The tech had panicked, screaming for ventilation. He had called it stabilization fluid, a dielectric coolant used to preserve the integrity of highly volatile electronics, specifically the guidance cores of experimental weaponry. Lucas scrambled to his feet, startling Gunnar awake. The dog was instantly alert, head up, eyes locked on Lucas. It wasn't the watch, Lucas whispered, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. He walked over to the table, slamming his hand down next to Emily's tablet. It wasn't the watch inside the box. It was the box itself, or the lining of the bag. Emily looked up, startled. What are you talking about? The smell, Lucas said, his voice rising with excitement. When Thorne opened that bag, I smelled vanilla. Artificial vanilla mixed with ozone. I haven't smelled that in 6 years. It's a preservative coolant. The military uses it for one thing only, stabilizing the gyroscopes in thermal nuclear guidance systems. Brody turned from the window. You're saying Thorne had a missile part in court? Lucas nodded furiously. Think about it. It's the perfect cover. He steals the core from the black site. He needs to move it to his private vault, but the city is crawling with feds because of the theft. He can't use a courier. He can't use a truck. Those get searched. But a victim, a wealthy, respectable victim, walking into a federal courthouse for a civil hearing, nobody searches the victim. Brody rubbed his jaw, the pieces falling into place. He hid it in the lining. The bomb squad scanned for explosives. They scanned for gunpowder. They didn't scan for a guidance chip made of rare earth metals because they weren't looking for it, and the lead shielding in the briefcase blocked the X-ray Emily added, typing furiously on her tablet, but it couldn't block the smell. That coolant. It's volatile. It leaks on a molecular level. Lucas looked at Gunner. The dog was watching him, tail thumping once against the floorboards. Gunner smelled the leak, Lucas said softly. He didn't attack Thorne. He was trying to retrieve the package. That's what he was trained to do. Locate and retrieve. He was trying to pull the bag away from the hostile. Thorne isn't just a smuggler, Lucas said, his voice cold. He's a traitor. He walked a piece of doomsday technology right past a judge, and when my dog called him on it, he tried to have him executed. Emily looked up from her screen, her face pale. If that's true, if Thorne really has the core, then we are the only loose end. He knows Gunner marked the bag. He knows we're putting this together. And he has resources, Brody muttered. He won't send lawyers this time. As if summoned by the fear in the room, Gunner stood up. His ears swiveled toward the ceiling. He let out a low guttural growl that vibrated through the floorboards. The hair on his back stood up in a rigid line. He wasn't looking at the door. He was looking up. Lucas froze. He knew that look. Hush, he hissed, killing the lantern instantly. The cabin plunged into darkness. What is it? Emily whispered, terror edging into her voice. Quiet, Lucas commanded. He moved to the window, peering out into the storm. At first, there was only the sound of the rain and the wind. But then beneath the howling of the gale, he felt it. A rhythmic thumping. A vibration that rattled the glass in the panes. It was getting louder. Chopper. Brody drew his weapon. In this weather, nobody flies in this weather. Thorne does, Lucas said grimly. He's got military-grade hardware. Thermal imaging. They found us. The thumping grew into a roar. A blinding white spotlight cut through the rain, sweeping across the forest floor, illuminating the trees in stark ghostly relief. The light hit the cabin, bathing the interior in a harsh, blinding glare. Get down, Lucas screamed, tackling Emily to the floor. The windows shattered inward, not from the wind, but from the concussive force of heavy-caliber rounds tearing through the wood. The sound was deafening. Wood splinters and glass sprayed across the room like shrapnel. Thorne hadn't sent a team to arrest them. He had sent a hit squad to erase them. Gunner barked a ferocious sound of defiance and tried to lunge toward the window, but Lucas grabbed his collar, dragging him down behind the heavy cast-iron stove. Stay down. From outside, through the roar of the helicopter rotors, a voice boomed over a loudspeaker, distorted and metallic. This is a restricted zone. You have 10 seconds to surrender the animal. If you do not comply, we will level the structure. They don't want us, Brody shouted over the noise, crouching behind an overturned table. They want the dog. They want to dissect him to see how the hell he found that core. Lucas looked at Gunner. The dog was pressed against him, body trembling with the instinct to fight, but eyes locked on Lucas, waiting for orders. Lucas looked at the biosensor scar on Gunner's neck. They would cut his head off to get that chip. They would kill him just to study the hardware. Over my dead body, Lucas growled. He looked at Brody. How much ammo do you have? 2 clips, Brody said. Against a chopper and a ground team. We're dead, Lucas. Not yet, Lucas said. He looked at the floorboards. This used to be a ranger station. There's a root cellar, a storm hatch under the rug. He kicked the rug aside. There it was. A heavy wooden trapdoor. He yanked it open. Damp, earthy air wafted up. Go, Lucas ordered Emily. Take Gunner. What about you? Emily cried, grabbing his arm. I'm gonna buy you time, Lucas said, pulling a flare gun from the emergency kit on the wall. Get into the woods. Head for the creek. The water will mask your heat signature from the thermal cameras. Gunner whined, refusing to move toward the hole. He grabbed Lucas's sleeve with his teeth, tugging him backward. He knew Lucas was planning to stay behind. Nobody, Lucas said, his voice breaking as he shoved the dog toward Emily. You have to go. That's an order. Go. Emily dragged the reluctant dog down into the darkness. Brody followed. Lucas slammed the trapdoor shut and dragged the heavy table over it. He stood up alone in the center of the cabin, the spotlight pinning him like a bug on a board. He gripped the flare gun. The loudspeaker crackled again. Time is up. The front door of the cabin exploded inward. Men in black tactical gear poured in laser sights cutting through the dust. Lucas raised the flare gun, not aiming at the men, but at the stack of old kerosene cans stored in the corner. Come and get it, you bastards, he whispered. He pulled the trigger. The flare hissed across the room, striking the cans. The explosion was instantaneous. A wall of fire erupted, separating Lucas from the hit squad. The cabin filled with smoke and heat. Lucas didn't wait to see them burn. He turned and dove through the back window, crashing into the mud outside, just as the roof of the cabin began to collapse. He rolled, coughing, the heat searing his back. He scrambled into the brush, the rain instantly soaking him again. He could hear shouting behind him. He could hear the helicopter pivoting its spotlight, searching the tree line. He was exposed. He was unarmed, and he was being hunted by the most dangerous mercenaries money could buy. But as he pulled himself up, wiping mud from his eyes, he felt a wet nose press against his hand. He looked down. Gunner, you stubborn idiot, Lucas choked out, half laughing, half sobbing. I told you to go. Gunner didn't look at the fire. He didn't look at the helicopter. He looked at Lucas, and then he turned his head toward the deep woods, his ears flicking. He let out a low, urgent bark. He wasn't just staying. He was leading. He knew a way out that the thermal cameras couldn't see. Lucas grabbed the dog's fur. Lead the way, partner. Together, man and dog vanished into the storm, leaving the burning cabin behind them as a decoy. Thorne's men would think they died in the fire. They were wrong. They had just driven the wolf back into the wild, and now the wolf was coming for them. The fire didn't start with a spark, it started with a roar. The mercenaries outside had stopped shooting. They had realized that bullets were too clean, too traceable, and perhaps too kind for the man who had humiliated them. Instead, they had tossed incendiary grenades through the shattered windows. The old dry timber of the ranger station, seasoned by decades of summer heat and winter frost, didn't just catch fire, it exploded. In seconds, the walls were climbing with sheets of orange plasma, the heat instantaneous and crushing, sucking the oxygen out of the room with a terrifying whoosh. Lucas Bennett scrambled backward, coughing violently as the thick black smoke rolled over them like a tidal wave. He grabbed Dr. Emily Cole by the jacket, dragging her away from the inferno consuming the front entrance. The heat was physical, a heavy weight pressing against his skin, searing his eyebrows and making his lungs scream for air. Get to the back, he shouted, but his voice was swallowed by the deafening crackle of the flames. The structural integrity of the cabin was failing. The roof groaned a sound like a dying beast, and then the main support beam above them snapped. It happened in slow motion. Lucas saw the heavy oak timber coming down, wreathed in flame. He didn't think about himself. He shoved Emily hard, sending her sprawling into the corner of the room, out of the drop zone. But the recoil of the push left him exposed. The beam crashed down, not on his head, but across his right leg. The agony was immediate and blinding. Lucas screamed a raw, primal sound that was instantly drowned out by the roar of the fire. The weight was immovable. He was pinned, trapped in a burning box that was rapidly turning into a crematorium. Lucas Emily screamed, crawling toward him, her face streaked with soot and tears. She tried to lift the beam, her hands burning on the hot wood, but it was useless. It weighed hundreds of pounds. The fire was closing in the circle of safety, shrinking by the second. The smoke was thicker now, a choking gray blanket that obscured the floor and stung the eyes until they watered shut. Emily was coughing uncontrollably, her body sagging as the carbon monoxide began to take hold. She slumped against the wall, her movements growing sluggish. Gunner was frantic. The Belgian Malinois darted between Lucas and the back window. The glass was broken, the frame low enough for a dog to leap through. Beyond that window lay the cool, wet darkness of the forest. Freedom, life, safety. Gunner looked at the window. He felt the fresh air hitting his nose. Every instinct in his animal brain, every evolutionary drive to survive screamed at him to run, to leave the fire, to live. He looked back at Lucas, the man who had saved him from a cage, the man who had shared his bed, his food, and his nightmares. Lucas looked up at the dog, his face pale beneath the soot, his eyes filled with a heartbreaking acceptance. He waved a hand weakly toward the window. Go. Lucas wheezed the smoke, stealing his voice. Go, Gunner. That's a command. Leave. Gunner looked at the window one last time. Then he turned his back on it. He didn't run. He didn't escape. He walked back into the heart of the fire. He moved to Lucas, stepping over the burning debris, his paws blistering on the hot floorboards. He lay down, not next to Lucas, but on top of him. He draped his 80-pound body over Lucas's chest and face, pressing him into the floor, shielding him. Above them, the ceiling was disintegrating. Showers of sparks and burning embers rained down like hellfire. They didn't hit Lucas. They hit Gunner. The dog flinched with every burn, his muscles spasming as the hot coals singed his coat and seared his skin, but he didn't move. He didn't yelp. He simply absorbed the pain, acting as a living shield, a biological blanket protecting his handler from the falling sky. He pressed his wet nose against Lucas's neck, letting out a low, steady rumble. It wasn't a growl. It was a reassurance. I am here. We go together. Lucas wept, his tears evaporating instantly in the heat. He wrapped his arms around the dog, burying his face in the fur that smelled of ozone and burnt hair. He couldn't breathe. The darkness was closing in, the edges of his vision turning gray. This was it. This was the end. He closed his eyes, ready to let go. But Gunner wasn't done. The biosensor in his jaw was screaming, detecting the rapidly depleting oxygen levels, but the soldier in his brain was still active. He felt Lucas fading. He knew they had seconds, not minutes. He lifted his head, fighting the smoke that filled his lungs. He didn't just bark. A normal bark would be lost in the roar of the fire. He needed a signal. He needed a frequency that cut through the chaos. He began to vocalize. It wasn't a random sound. It was a rhythmic, sharp, piercing cadence. 3 short barks, 3 long howling bays, 3 short barks. SOS. It was a pattern he had been trained to use in the Guardian program when a handler was down in a chemical zone. A distress beacon made of sound. Bark, 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 howl, 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 bark, bark, bark. He repeated it over and over. His throat burned. The smoke choked him, but he kept the rhythm perfect. It was a sound of defiance, a sound of order amidst the chaos of destruction. Outside, 100 yards away, Sheriff Brody was driving his cruiser blindly through the field, his wipers thrashing against the rain. He had lost visual contact with the cabin when the smoke became too thick. He was screaming into his radio, demanding backup that was too far away to help. He couldn't see the flames anymore, just a wall of black smoke. He slammed his hand on the steering wheel, tears of frustration in his eyes. He didn't know where the cabin was. If he drove into the fire, he might kill them. If he stayed back, they died. He was helpless. And then he heard it, faintly at first, cutting through the wind and the rain. A rhythm, not the chaotic barking of a panicked animal. A signal. Brody froze. He knew that rhythm. He was an old soldier himself. That was Morse code. That was a distress call. He rolled down his window, ignoring the rain soaking his face. He listened. There it was again. Short, 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 long, long, long. It was coming from the center of the smoke cloud, low to the ground. Gunner. The dog was guiding him in. Brody didn't hesitate. He shifted the cruiser into low gear and floored the accelerator. The engine roared, the tires spinning in the mud before catching traction. He aimed the car straight at the sound of the barking. He couldn't see the cabin walls. He couldn't see the debris. He drove on faith and the sound of a dog who refused to die. The heat radiated through the windshield as he entered the smoke cloud. Visibility dropped to 0. He gripped the wheel, his heart hammering. Trust the dog, he whispered. Trust the dog. The barking was louder now, directly in front of him. He saw a flicker of orange flame through the gray haze. He braced himself. Hold on. The cruiser slammed into the burning wall of the cabin. Wood splintered and shrieked. The car shuddered violently as it smashed through the weakened structure, glass flying, metal groaning. The impact knocked the wind out of Brody, but he was alive. He had breached the inferno. Inside the cabin, the sudden crash of the car while smashing inward sent a fresh wave of sparks flying. The headlights of the cruiser cut through the smoke like divine beams. Lucas looked up, dazed, coughing. He saw the grill of the police car stopped 5 feet from where he lay. Brody kicked his door open, tumbling out into the heat. He wrapped his coat around his face and crawled forward. Bennett, Cole, sound off here. Emily coughed from the corner, dragging herself forward. Brody grabbed her, pulling her toward the back seat of the cruiser. Get in! He turned back. He saw the pile of debris. He saw the beam pinning a lead, and he saw Gunner. The dog was still on top of Lucas, shielding him, barking the signal right into the face of the fire. Brody rushed over. He grabbed the beam. It was hot enough to blister his hands, but adrenaline is a powerful drug. He heaved his back, screaming in protest. The beam shifted an inch. It was enough. Lucas, move! Brody screamed. Lucas dragged his leg free, crying out in pain as the circulation returned to the crushed limb. He tried to stand, but fell. Gunner was there instantly. The dog jammed his shoulder under Lucas's armpit, taking his weight, growling low, urging him up. Together, the old man and the injured dog dragged the soldier toward the car. They tumbled into the back seat just as the rest of the roof gave way. The cabin collapsed inward with a roar that shook the ground. Brody slammed the car into reverse, the tires screaming as he backed out of the fire, dragging the front bumper through the burning wreckage. They spun around in the mud, the heat fading as they put distance between themselves and the death trap. In the back seat, it was silent, except for the sound of harsh, ragged breathing. Lucas pulled Gunner onto his lap. The dog's coat was singed, patches of fur burned away to reveal angry red skin. His whiskers were gone. He was wheezing, his lungs full of smoke. But he was alive. He looked up at Lucas, his amber eyes watering, and licked the soot from Lucas's chin. "You crazy bastard," Lucas whispered, burying his face in the dog's neck, his tears washing away the grime. "You crazy, beautiful bastard. You came back." Emily leaned over from the other side of the seat, checking Gunner's pulse. Her hands were black with soot, but her touch was gentle. "His heart rate is through the roof," she said, her voice raspy. "But he's stable. That sensor, that training, he just saved us all." Brody looked in the rearview mirror. The cabin was nothing but a pile of burning embers now. The helicopter had peeled off, assuming the job was done. No one could have survived that. Thorne would be celebrating right now. He would think he had won. "Let him think we're dead," Brody said, his voice cold steel. "Let him sleep soundly tonight, because tomorrow the dead are coming back, and we're bringing hell with us." Lucas looked out the back window at the fire. He stroked Gunner's head, feeling the solid, rhythmic beat of the dog's heart against his chest. They had taken everything from him, his home, his reputation, almost his life. But they hadn't taken his dog. And that was the biggest mistake Julian Thorne would ever make. The retreat was over. The counteroffensive started now. The morning sun gleamed off the polished chrome of the podium, casting a blinding reflection across the manicured lawn of the Thorne Security Headquarters. It was a perfect stage for a perfect lie. Hundreds of reporters jostled for position behind the velvet ropes, their cameras clicking in a frantic, rhythmic staccato that sounded like insects devouring a crop. Behind the podium stood Julian Thorne. He looked impeccable. His suit was tailored to perfection, his tie a deep, trustworthy blue, his hair coiffed to hide the fact that he hadn't slept in 24 hours. He raised his hands, a gesture of benevolent authority, and the crowd fell silent. "Ladies and gentlemen," Thorne began, his voice smooth, projected clearly through the high-end sound system. "We live in an era of uncertainty. Threats are no longer just on distant battlefields. They are in our backyards. They come in the form of instability, of chaos, and yes, sometimes in the form of uncontrolled, dangerous elements that threaten our peace." He paused for effect, looking solemnly into the cameras. "Last night, my private security team was forced to neutralize a significant threat in the Shenandoah region, a rogue element, a dangerous weaponized animal controlled by a disturbed individual. It brings me no joy to say this, but the situation has been resolved. The threat is gone. The mad dog has been put down." A murmur of agreement rippled through the press. Thorne nodded, accepting their validation. He reached for a glass of water, his hands steady. He felt invincible. The cabin was ash. The dog was dead. The soldier was buried under the rubble. And the guidance core, the multi-million-dollar piece of technology that had started this entire mess, was safely stowed away, ready for transport. He had won. But then a sound cut through the murmuring crowd. It wasn't a question from a reporter. It wasn't the click of a camera. It was the screech of tires. The sound was harsh, violent, and utterly out of place in the sanitized perfection of the press conference. Thorne frowned, looking toward the main gate. A police cruiser smashed through the wooden security arm, sending splinters flying into the air. The car was a wreck. Its front bumper was hanging off the grill, clogged with ash and mud, the paint scorched and peeling as if it had driven through the gates of hell itself. It skidded to a halt in the center of the driveway, blocking the exit, its siren giving one final dying wail before cutting out. Security Thorne barked into the microphone, his composure cracking. "Remove that vehicle." But the security guards hesitated. The doors of the cruiser opened slowly. The first person to step out was Sheriff Brody. He looked like a man who had gone 10 rounds with a heavyweight and lost, but was still standing out of pure spite. His uniform was torn, his face smeared with soot, his badge hanging crookedly on his chest. He placed a hand on his holster, his eyes scanning the crowd with a look that dared anyone to move. Then the passenger door opened. Dr. Emily Cole stepped out. She was covered in mud, her hair wild, her medical bag gripped tightly in her hand. She looked exhausted, but her chin was high, her eyes burning with a cold scientific fury. And finally, from the back seat, Lucas Bennett emerged. A hush fell over the lawn, absolute and terrifying. Lucas didn't look like a human being. He looked like a revenant. His orange jumpsuit was gone, replaced by a scorched tactical vest he must have pulled from the cruiser's trunk. His face was a mask of burns and black soot, his right leg dragging slightly as he walked, blood seeping through the bandage wrapped around his thigh. He didn't look at the cameras. He didn't look at the guards. He looked straight at Julian Thorne. Thorne gripped the podium, his knuckles turning white. He felt a cold sweat break out on his back. Ghosts weren't supposed to walk in the daylight. "You," Thorne hissed, his voice amplified by the microphone sounding shrill and panicked. "You're supposed to be dead." "Sorry to disappoint you," Lucas said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried across the lawn with the weight of a sledgehammer. "But we survived your fire, and we're here to finish what you started." The reporters sensed blood. They turned their cameras away from the podium and toward the trio of survivors. Questions began to fly. "Mr. Bennett, is it true? Did Thorne attack you?" "What happened in the woods?" Thorne slammed his hand on the podium. "Enough. This man is a fugitive. He is a dangerous criminal who broke out of jail. Arrest him, security." Two large guards moved toward Lucas, hands reaching for their batons. Sheriff Brody stepped forward, drawing his service weapon. He didn't point it at the guards. He pointed it at the sky. "This is an active federal investigation," Brody shouted. "Anyone who touches my witness gets charged with obstruction of justice." "Step back." The guards froze. Thorne's face twisted into a sneer. "Witness." "What witness?" "You have nothing. Bennett, you have a burnt cabin and a crazy story. You claim I'm a smuggler. Prove it. You claim I stole military tech. Prove it. You have no evidence." Lucas stopped 10 feet from the podium. He looked up at Thorne, his eyes cold and empty of mercy. "You're right, Thorne. I don't have a file. I don't have a recording. But I have something better." Thorne laughed, a nervous, jagged sound. "What?" "Your word. The word of a disgraced Marine against a pillar of the community. The court already decided, Bennett. Your dog is dead, and you are nothing." Lucas smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of a wolf who had just cornered a rabbit. "You really should have checked the body, Julian." Lucas put 2 fingers to his lips and let out a sharp, piercing whistle. The sound cut through the morning air like a knife. The back door of the cruiser, which had been left slightly ajar, swung open fully. A collective gasp went through the crowd. A woman in the front row covered her mouth. A cameraman zoomed in, his hand shaking. Stepping out of the car was Gunner. He didn't look like the majestic animal that had stood in the courtroom yesterday. He looked broken. His left front leg was heavily bandaged in white gauze that was already stained with mud. The fur on his left side was singed off, revealing angry red skin beneath. His whiskers were gone. He moved with a heavy limp favoring his injured shoulder, but his head was high. His ears were forward, and his amber eyes were locked on Julian Thorne with an intensity that made the billionaire take a step back. "He's alive," someone whispered. Gunner didn't bark. He didn't growl. He didn't run around in a frenzy. He walked with a slow, terrifying purpose. He moved past Lucas. He moved past Brody. He ignored the reporters who were leaning in trying to get a shot of the mad dog. Thorne watched the dog approach, his eyes widening in horror. He looked at his security team. "Shoot it!" he screamed, his voice cracking. "It's attacking me! Shoot it now!" But the guards didn't shoot. They couldn't. Gunner wasn't attacking. He wasn't even looking at Thorne anymore. He walked right past the podium. He walked right past the security detail. He walked straight toward the sleek black stretch limousine parked on the gravel drive behind the stage, Thorne's personal vehicle, the car he was planning to take to the airfield in 20 minutes. Thorne's face went from pale to gray. "No," he whispered. Gunner stopped at the rear bumper of the limousine. He sniffed the air once. He let out a low vibrating whine. Then he sat down. He sat perfectly still, staring at the trunk of the car. It was the passive alert signal, the signal of a guardian dog who had found the target. Lucas looked at Thorne. "There's your proof," Lucas said softly. Thorne scrambled down from the stage, abandoning his dignity. "Get away from my car. That's private property. You have no warrant. I don't need a warrant for probable cause," Brody said, holstering his weapon and pulling out a pair of handcuffs, and a positive alert from a certified detection K9 is probable cause in all 50 states. Gunner stood up. He looked at the bumper. He didn't wait for a key. He didn't wait for a crowbar. He opened his jaws and bit down on the plastic composite of the rear bumper. With a savage shake of his head, he tore a chunk of the car away. He wasn't attacking a person. He was exposing the hiding spot. Underneath the plastic hidden inside the hollow frame of the chassis, a lead-lined box glinted in the sunlight. Gunner barked once, a sound of finality. He had found the ghost. And everyone in the world was watching. The sound of tearing metal and shattering plastic echoed across the silent lawn like a gunshot. Gunner shook his head violently, his powerful neck muscles bunching as he ripped a massive chunk of the limousine's rear bumper free. He didn't drop it. He tossed it aside with a contemptuous flick of his head, the debris skidding across the gravel driveway. The crowd gasped a collective intake of breath that sucked the air out of the morning. Beneath the ruined plastic facade of the luxury car exposing the raw chassis sat a heavy, lead-lined metal box. It was welded crudely to the frame, hidden deep where a spare tire should have been. It wasn't a car part. It was industrial. It was military. And even from 10 feet away, Dr. Emily Cole could see the faint, sickly yellow residue leaking from the seal. The stabilization fluid, the scent of vanilla and ozone drifted on the breeze, faint but undeniable to those who knew what death smelled like. Thorne froze. His face went slack, the mask of the arrogant billionaire slipping away to reveal the terrified criminal beneath. He stared at the box that wasn't supposed to be found. The box that contained enough classified technology to send him to federal prison for the rest of his natural life. The reporters weren't asking questions anymore. They were filming. Every lens, every phone, every live feed was focused on the hole in the bumper and the damning evidence inside. The narrative shifted in a heartbeat. The headline wasn't about a mad dog anymore. It was about a hidden payload. "No," Thorne whispered, shaking his head, stepping backward. "That's not mine. You planted that, you framed me." He looked around for his security team, but they were backing away. They were mercenaries loyal only to the paycheck, and they knew a sinking ship when they saw one. They lowered their batons. They raised their hands. They weren't going to die for a guidance chip. Thorne was alone, and he was cornered. Panic is a dangerous thing. It makes smart men do stupid things. Thorne didn't surrender. He didn't call a lawyer. He reached inside his tailored suit jacket. His hand came out holding a compact silver pistol. "Gun!" someone screamed. The crowd scattered. Reporters dove for cover behind camera cases. Sheriff Brody raised his weapon, but he was too far away. Lucas lunged forward, but his injured leg buckled, sending him stumbling to one knee. Thorne wasn't aiming at the police. He wasn't aiming at Lucas. He leveled the gun straight at the dog standing by the bumper. His eyes were wide, manic, filled with a hatred so pure it was almost tangible. "You ruined everything!" Thorne shrieked, his finger tightening on the trigger. Gunner didn't flinch. He didn't cower. He saw the weapon. He recognized the threat, and he did exactly what the United States military had trained him to do. He engaged. Before Thorne could fire, Gunner launched himself. He covered the distance between the car and the man in a blur of motion that the cameras would later have to play back in slow motion to catch. He didn't go for the arm. He didn't go for the leg. He went center mass. Gunner slammed into Thorne's chest like a cannonball. The impact was brutal. The air left Thorne's lungs in a wheezing explosion. The gun flew from his hand, spinning high into the air before clattering harmlessly onto the pavement 10 feet away. Thorne hit the ground hard, the back of his head bouncing off the grass. Before he could even try to scramble up, a heavy weight pinned him to the earth. Gunner stood over him. One massive paw was planted squarely on Thorne's chest, pressing him down with 80 pounds of unyielding force. The dog lowered his head, his jaws open, revealing teeth that could snap bone like dry twigs. He placed those teeth right against Thorne's throat. He didn't bite. He didn't tear. He just held him there. A low, terrifying rumble vibrated through the dog's chest, traveling straight into Thorne's ribcage. Gunner's amber eyes bored into the man beneath him. There was no madness in those eyes. There was no rabies. There was only the cold, hard judgment of a superior being looking down at a coward. Thorne froze, terrified to breathe, terrified to move. He could feel the heat of the dog's breath on his neck. He could feel the sharpness of the canines resting against his pulse. He looked up into the face of the creature he had tried to kill, the creature he had called a monster, and he saw something that broke his spirit completely. He saw mercy. "Get it off me!" Thorne screamed, his voice high and shrill, tears of terror streaming down his face into his ears. "Help! It's going to kill me! It's a monster! Please!" Sheriff Brody walked over. He didn't run. He walked slowly, holstering his weapon with a deliberate click. He kicked the silver pistol away, securing the scene. Then he looked down at the billionaire writhing under the paw of the wounded, bandaged dog. Brody reached for his handcuffs. He looked at Thorne, then at Gunner. He smiled a cold, satisfied expression. "He's not a monster, son," Brody said, his voice calm, carrying over the silence of the lawn. "And he's not a dog." Brody knelt, snapping the cuffs onto Thorne's wrists as Gunner stepped back, job done, returning to a perfect heel position beside Lucas. "He is a soldier," Brody said, hauling Thorne to his feet. "And you just lost the war. 3 months can change a lot of things. In Virginia, the burnt remains of a cabin are already being reclaimed by the forest green vines curling over blackened wood. In a federal prison cell, Julian Thorne sits in silence, staring at a concrete wall, stripped of his suits, his money, and his arrogance. And here in the heart of Washington, D.C., the autumn wind carries the sound of applause, not sirens. The Grand Hall is filled with people. Generals, senators, and the same reporters who once called for blood now stand in respectful silence. At the center of the stage, Lucas Bennett stands tall. He isn't wearing an orange jumpsuit anymore. He is wearing his dress blues, the uniform fitting him perfectly again, though he leans slightly on a cane, favoring the leg that was crushed under the burning beam. The physical scars are still there, fading, but present a map of the hell they walked through together. But the haunted look in his eyes is gone. It has been replaced by peace. Beside him sits Gunner. The bandages are gone. His fur has grown back over the burns on his flank, though the hair is slightly lighter there, a silver badge of honor against the copper and black. He sits with the perfect statue-like stillness of a soldier at attention. He doesn't look at the crowd. He doesn't look at the cameras. He looks only at Lucas. A high-ranking official steps forward holding a velvet cushion. On it rests a medal. It isn't a trinket. It is the Medal of Bravery, the highest honor a civilian animal can receive. The official speaks of courage under fire. He speaks of a network of corruption brought down by a single, unwavering instinct. He speaks of lives saved and a disaster averted. Lucas kneels. It is a struggle with his bad leg, but he refuses help. He wants to be eye to eye with his partner. He takes the medal, the gold, gleaming under the chandeliers, and gently fastens it to Gunner's collar. "You earned this, buddy, Lucas," whispers his voice thick with emotion. Gunner licks Lucas's cheek, a quick, affectionate gesture that breaks the solemnity of the moment and makes the crowd smile. Dr. Emily Cole stands in the front row, wiping a tear from her cheek. She looks radiant, the shadows of that terrifying night in the clinic erased by the light of this victory. As Lucas stands up, she steps forward to join him on stage. She doesn't say anything. She simply slips her hand into his. Lucas squeezes it, a silent promise of a future that doesn't involve running or hiding. Sheriff Brody is there too, standing in the back, arms crossed and nodding slowly. He doesn't need a medal. Knowing justice was served is enough for him. Later that evening, far away from the noise of the city, Lucas and Gunner sit on the porch of a new house. It is a small place, quiet, overlooking a valley painted in the deep purples and oranges of twilight. The air is cool and crisp. Lucas sits in a rocking chair watching the sun dip below the horizon. Emily is inside the soft clinking of dinner preparations drifting through the screen door. It is a normal sound, a domestic sound, a sound Lucas never thought he would hear again. Gunnar walks up the steps. His gait is a little stiff, the old injury in his shoulder flaring up with the damp weather, but he is strong. He sits beside Lucas, resting his heavy head on the man's thigh. Lucas runs his hand over the dog's head, tracing the line of the old biosensor scar that is now just a faint white line under the fur. The world called him a weapon. The government called him an experiment, a classified asset to be used and discarded. Thorne called him a danger, a monster to be destroyed. But as Lucas looks down into those amber eyes, he knows the truth. He isn't a weapon. He isn't a tool. He is just Gunnar. People often say that dogs are man's best friend. It is a cliche, a phrase printed on greeting cards and bumper stickers, but sometimes in the quiet moments between life and death, you realize it is too small a phrase. Friends offer comfort, but Gunnar offered his life. Sometimes they aren't just friends. They are guardian angels sent down in fur and muscle to teach us something we have forgotten about loyalty, about courage, about justice. Gunnar lets out a long, contented sigh, closing his eyes as the last light of the day fades into a star-filled night. He is not searching for bombs anymore. He is not hunting ghosts. He is simply a dog sitting with his boy watching the sunset. And for the first time in a long time, the soldier is finally home. The war is over, and they have won the only thing that ever really mattered: peace. The harrowing journey of Lucas and Gunnar serves as a poignant reminder that the most profound truths are often hidden beneath the surface, waiting for someone brave enough to uncover them. At its core, this story teaches us that loyalty is not merely a feeling, it is an action. It is the fierce refusal to abandon a comrade when the world has turned its back. When the court labeled Gunnar a monster and sentenced him to death, it would have been easy for Lucas to walk away to save himself. But he didn't. He understood that loyalty is a two-way street. Because Gunnar never gave up on the mission, Lucas could never give up on Gunnar. Furthermore, this narrative challenges our perception of judgment. Society was quick to condemn the dog based on a single moment of aggression, failing to see the heroism driving that instinct. We live in an age of instant reaction where we often vilify what we do not immediately understand. Gunnar's actions remind us to look deeper, to trust instincts over optics, and to recognize that sometimes the bad behavior we see is actually a desperate attempt to protect us from unseen dangers. Gunnar was willing to be the villain in the eyes of the public, to be the hero in reality. Finally, the story illustrates the healing power of the human-animal bond. These two broken soldiers, one man, one dog, found wholeness only in each other. They proved that family isn't defined by blood, but by who is willing to walk through the fire for you. Gunnar's silence spoke louder than the lies of powerful men, proving that integrity eventually shines through the darkest circumstances. In the end, the lesson is simple, yet earth-shattering. Real heroes don't seek glory. They simply do what is right even when it hurts, and they never ever leave a partner behind. This kind of unconditional love is rare, and when found, it is worth fighting the whole world to protect. If Gunnar's loyalty touched your heart, please hit the like button. Share this story to honor our four-legged heroes, and subscribe for more tales of courage that leave you speechless.